The great hall of Frostbourne Manor blazed with 1,000 candles, their flickering light dancing across the faces of 300 wolves who had gathered to witness the union of their future alpha and his chosen bride. Neve stood at the altar in a gown of winter white, her dark hair threaded with silver ribbons that caught the candlelight like stars, and she told herself that the trembling in her hands was merely bridal nerves. The ceremony had been beautiful. The vows had been spoken. Lucian's kiss had been brief and cold, but she had attributed that to the formality of the occasion, to the weight of so many eyes upon them. Now the feast was ending, and the wolves were growing restless with drink and celebration, their laughter echoing off the vaulted stone ceilings. Neve sat in the place of honor beside her new husband, her fingers wrapped around a goblet of wine she had barely touched. The child growing inside her, barely 8 weeks along, a secret she had kept close to her heart, made her cautious about such things. She had planned to tell Lucian tonight, in the privacy of their wedding chamber. She had imagined his face softening with wonder, his hand coming to rest on her still flat belly, his voice rough with emotion as he welcomed the news of his heir. She had been a fool. Lucian's hand closed around her wrist beneath the table, his grip tight enough to bruise. Neve's breath caught in her throat as she turned to look at him, and what she saw in his pale blue eyes made her blood run cold. Gone was the charming suitor who had courted her through the autumn months, who had whispered promises against her skin during those stolen nights when he had claimed her body, but never spoke of claiming the bond. In his place sat a stranger whose handsome face had twisted into something ugly and cruel. "Did you think I wouldn't know?" he murmured, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. His lips curved into a smile for the benefit of their guests, but his eyes were chips of ice. "Did you think you could hide it from me, little Neve? I could smell it the moment you walked down the aisle. That thing growing inside you, poisoning your blood, changing your scent." Neve's heart hammered against her ribs. "Lucian, please. The child is yours. You know it's yours. There has been no one else, I swear it." "Of course it's mine." His grip tightened, and she bit back a whimper of pain. "That's precisely the problem. You were supposed to be a pretty prize, a symbol of the alliance between our packs. You were supposed to give me years of freedom before the burden of heirs. Instead, you trapped me. You stole my youth, my future, my choices, all for the sake of a squalling brat I never wanted." The words hit her like physical blows. She felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Not here. Not in front of everyone." "I didn't plan this," she whispered desperately. "These things happen. It doesn't have to change anything. It changes everything." Lucian released her wrist and rose to his feet, and the hall fell silent at the movement. 300 wolves turned their attention to their future alpha, and Neve felt the weight of all those eyes like stones pressing down on her chest. She wanted to run, wanted to disappear, but her legs wouldn't obey her commands. Lucian raised his goblet high, and his voice rang out across the great hall with terrible clarity. "My brothers and sisters, I must make a confession. I have been deceived." He looked down at Neve, and his smile was a knife's edge. "This woman came to me with sweetness on her lips and treachery in her heart. She allowed me to believe she was worthy of the Frostborn name, worthy of standing beside your future alpha. But tonight, on what should have been the most sacred night of our union, I have discovered the truth." Neve's hands were shaking so badly that her wine sloshed over the rim of her goblet, staining the white tablecloth red. She opened her mouth to speak, to defend herself, but no words would come. Her throat had closed around her terror. "She carries a child," Lucian continued, and a murmur rippled through the assembled wolves. "A child conceived before our vows were spoken, a child she kept secret from me. A child that proves her duplicity and her desperation to trap me into a bond I never freely chose." "That's not true!" The words tore from Neve's throat before she could stop them. She stumbled to her feet, her chair scraping harshly against the stone floor. You came to me, Lucian. You came to my chambers. You spoke of love and destiny. You— Silence. The command cracked through the air like a whip, and Neve felt her wolf cower inside her, beaten down by the force of his alpha authority. Her legs buckled, and she caught herself on the edge of the table, gasping for breath. Lucian stepped away from her as though she were something unclean. The pure-blood prophecy warns us about creatures like this, he said, and his voice had taken on the rolling cadence of a preacher. Mixed-blood children, born of deception and weakness, will rise to destroy the natural order of the wolves. They will pollute our bloodlines, corrupt our power, and bring ruin to all we have built. Around the hall, wolves were rising to their feet. Some looked uncertain, confused, but others, too many others, were nodding along with Lucian's words. These were his followers, Neve realized with growing horror, the ones who had taken to calling themselves the purebloods in recent months, who gathered in secret meetings and spoke of cleansing and purity. She had thought them a fringe group, a handful of zealots. Now she saw that they had spread like poison through the pack. Her tainted blood proves what she is, Lucian continued, pointing at Neve with one accusatory finger. A deceiver. A trap-layer. A threat to everything we hold sacred. The chanting began low, just a handful of voices at first, but it grew and swelled until the great hall shook with the sound of it. Tainted blood, tainted blood, tainted blood. Neve pressed her hands over her belly, over the tiny life growing inside her, and she felt her wolf howling with grief and rage inside the cage that Lucian's pack magic had built around it. She had been suppressed since the moment she arrived at Frostborn Manor, her connection to her wolf muted and controlled through techniques she didn't fully understand. Now, when she needed that wild part of herself most desperately, she couldn't reach it. "Please," she whispered, but her voice was lost in the roar of the crowd. Lucian raised his hand, and the chanting stopped as abruptly as it had begun. In the sudden silence, Neve could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. "I, Lucian Frostborn, hereby reject this woman as my mate and my bride," he declared, and each word fell like a stone into the stillness. "I cast her out from the protection of this pack. Let her face the winter alone, and let the old gods judge whether she deserves to survive." The great doors of the hall swung open, and a blast of frigid air swept through the room, carrying snowflakes that melted on Neve's skin like frozen tears. Outside, the storm she had noticed earlier had grown into something monstrous, a howling blizzard that would kill an unprotected wolf within hours. "You can't do this." Neve's voice emerged as barely more than a croak. "The child, please, Lucian, whatever you think of me, the child is innocent. The child is an abomination." Lucian stepped forward, and the crowd parted before him like water. "And so are you. Go, Neve, go and take your tainted blood with you." Hands seized her arms, rough hands, belonging to wolves she had thought were her allies, her packmates. They dragged her toward the open doors, ignoring her struggles, deaf to her pleas. She caught glimpses of faces in the crowd. Some looked away in shame, others watched with hungry satisfaction, but none of them moved to help her. None of them would dare to defy their future alpha. The cold hit her like a physical wall as they threw her out into the night. She stumbled and fell, her white wedding gown instantly soaked by the snow, her bare feet burning against the frozen ground. Someone had taken her shoes. She hadn't even noticed. Tainted blood! The chant rose again from within the great hall, and then the doors slammed shut, cutting off the light and warmth and leaving her alone in the howling darkness. Neve pushed herself to her hands and knees, her entire body shaking with cold and shock. The snow was already beginning to pile around her, the wind cutting through her thin gown as though it were made of nothing at all. She could barely see 3 feet in front of her face, the blizzard reducing the world to a white, swirling chaos. She had to move. She had to find shelter, had to keep herself and her baby alive, had to. A sob tore from her throat, and she pressed her fist against her mouth to stifle it. There was no time for grief. There was no time for the shattered remnants of her heart to piece themselves back together. If she stayed here, she would die, and her child would die with her, and Lucian would have exactly what he wanted. The thought of giving him that satisfaction was what finally got her moving. Neve staggered to her feet, her arms wrapped around her middle as though she could protect the life inside her through sheer force of will. She had no idea where to go. Frostborn territory stretched for miles in every direction, and beyond its borders lay the wild lands, unclaimed territory where rogues and exiles scratched out meager existences, where the law of fang and claw was the only law that mattered. No, not unclaimed. There was one territory that bordered Frostborn lands to the east, a vast expanse of ancient forest and shadowed valleys that the other packs spoke of only in whispers. The Duskwalker territory, ruled by an alpha king who hadn't been seen in 3 years. They said he was mad. They said he was cursed. They said a prophecy had marked him for a fated mate, and he had retreated into his fortress rather than claim her. Neve didn't know if any of that was true. All she knew was that the Duskwalker lands were the only place Lucian might not follow, the only place where she might find mercy instead of judgment. She turned her face to the east and began to walk. The hours that followed blurred together in a haze of cold and pain and desperate determination. Neve lost feeling in her feet first, then her hands, then her legs. The snow came up to her knees in some places, forcing her to wade through drifts that sucked at her body like quicksand. Her wedding gown became a sodden weight dragging at her limbs, and at some point she abandoned it entirely, tearing the ruined silk away until she wore only the thin shift beneath. She talked to her baby as she walked. She told it about the mother she had lost when she was 12, about the grandmother who had raised her with stories of the old ways, her grandmother, who had been human before a wolf claimed her as mate, whose mixed bloodline had passed down through the generations and made Neve's family forever suspect in the eyes of purists like Lucian. She told it about the dreams she had once had of a different kind of life. She promised it safety and love and a future full of light. Even as the cold ate into her bones and the darkness pressed in from every side. The bleeding started when she was perhaps a mile from the Frostborn border. Just a trickle at first, barely noticeable against the other pains racking her body, but she felt it and knew what it meant. Her body was giving out. The cold and the stress were too much for the fragile new life inside her. "No," she gasped, her voice lost in the wind. "No, please, not yet. Just a little farther." She stumbled over something, a root, a rock, she never knew, and fell hard, her hands sinking into the snow up to her wrists. The impact drove the air from her lungs, and for a long moment she simply lay there, gasping, watching her breath crystallize in the frozen air. "Get up," she told herself. "Get up, get up, get up." But her body had stopped listening to her commands. The cold had sunk too deep, the exhaustion had grown too heavy, and when she tried to push herself upright, her arms simply collapsed beneath her. Neve rolled onto her back, staring up at the white sky through snow-crusted lashes. The flakes fell on her face like frozen kisses, melting against her fever-hot skin. She could feel her baby's heartbeat inside her, a tiny flutter that was growing weaker by the moment. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the life she had failed to protect. "I'm so sorry, little one. I tried." The howl came from somewhere close, a sound that seemed to shake the very air around her. It was not the hunting cry of a pack on the chase, nor the territorial warning of a lone wolf defending its range. This was something else entirely, something ancient and powerful and terrible in its grief. Neve tried to turn her head toward the sound, but her body had stopped responding entirely. All she could do was lie there, her eyes drifting closed, as heavy footsteps crunched through the snow toward her. A shadow fell across her face, blocking the endless fall of snowflakes. She forced her eyes open one last time and found herself staring up at a figure that seemed carved from the winter night itself. He was massive, easily the largest wolf she had ever seen in human form, with shoulders that blocked out the sky and dark hair that whipped around a face marked by terrible scars. But it was his eyes that captured her fading attention. They were the color of storm clouds, gray and fierce, and they were fixed on her with an expression she couldn't read. He dropped to his knees beside her, and when his hands touched her shoulders, electricity cracked through her body like lightning. Neve gasped, her back arching off the frozen ground as heat flooded through her veins where there had been only cold. Inside her chest, in a place that had been silent and suppressed for months, something stirred. Her wolf. Her wolf. Rising from whatever prison Lucian's pack magic had trapped it in, reaching toward the man who knelt above her with a recognition that transcended thought. His eyes, those storm-gray eyes, were shifting. Gold bled into the gray, molten and bright, and she watched his scarred face contort with an emotion she couldn't name. She saw his nostrils flare as he breathed in her scent, saw his massive hands tremble where they gripped her shoulders, saw his jaw clench so hard the muscles stood out like cords. "Mate," he growled, and the word rumbled through her like thunder. Then his eyes dropped to her belly, to the blood staining her shift, and his expression shattered into something raw and desperate and afraid. "No," he snarled, and the word was directed at the universe itself. "Not now. Not like this." He gathered her into his arms, lifting her as though she weighed nothing at all, and she felt the mate bond singing between them. Warmth spreading from everywhere their bodies touched, her wolf howling with recognition even as her human mind reeled with confusion and fear. She smelled pine and wood smoke and something else, something that her battered heart wanted to call home, and that terrified her most of all. "Stay with me." His voice was rough, commanding, shot through with a desperation that didn't match his fearsome appearance. He was already moving, carrying her through the snow with long, powerful strides. "Do you hear me? You stay with me. Both of you. I didn't wait 3 years for you to die in my arms." Neve wanted to ask what he meant. She wanted to ask his name, wanted to ask where he was taking her, wanted to ask why the mate bond burned so bright between them when she had given up on ever finding such a thing. But the darkness was rushing up to claim her, and the last thing she saw before it swallowed her whole was the war raging in his golden eyes, desperate hunger battling with what looked like dread. Neve drifted in darkness, but it was not the empty void she had expected death to bring. This darkness was warm, shot through with threads of gold that pulsed in rhythm with a heartbeat she could feel but not hear. She was aware of movement, of being carried, of strong arms that held her against a chest that radiated heat like a furnace. The mate bond, because that was what it was, she could no longer deny it, thrummed between them with every step he took, flooding her dying body with borrowed strength. "Stay," something whispered through that golden thread. "Stay with me. Fight." She wanted to obey. Gods help her, despite everything she had endured, despite the betrayal still raw and bleeding in her heart, she wanted to obey this stranger's command. Her wolf, so long suppressed, had risen from its prison and was pressing against the walls of her consciousness with desperate urgency. It recognized this male. It wanted him with a ferocity that frightened her. Time lost meaning in that warm darkness. She was aware of voices, his deep growl, others responding with varying degrees of shock and urgency, but she couldn't make out the words. She felt hands that were not his touching her, and her wolf snarled with possessive fury before his scent washed over her again, pine and wood smoke and that ineffable sense of home, and she subsided into the warmth of the bond. Someone was crying. It took her a long moment to realize it was her. The bleeding has stopped. A woman's voice, calm and professional despite an undercurrent of wonder. The child's heartbeat is stabilizing. Alpha, I don't understand. By all rights, they both should be. Don't. His voice cut through the darkness like a blade. Don't tell me what should have happened. Tell me what is happening. The mate bond. The woman sounded almost reverent. It's sustaining them both. I've read about this in the old texts, but I never thought she was so far gone, and yet the bond is pouring strength into her faster than her body can use it. It's like watching someone be remade from the inside out. A pause, weighted with wonder. And the child. Alpha. The energy radiating from her womb is unlike anything I've felt. There's power there. Old power. Whatever bloodline she carries, it's not ordinary. How long until she wakes? I can't say. Her body has been through extraordinary trauma. The cold alone should have killed her, never mind the blood loss and the stress to the pregnancy. She needs rest, time, warmth. She'll have all of it. The words were a vow, spoken with an intensity that made Neve's battered heart clench. Whatever she needs, whatever she wants. Do you understand me, Mira? Anything. I understand, Alpha. There was a pause, weighted with unspoken meaning. Does she know? About the prophecy? About why you've been... No. The single syllable was harsh, final. And she won't. Not yet. She's been through enough. She doesn't need that weight added to everything else. The darkness began to recede after that, pulling back like a tide revealing the shore. Neve became aware of her body again, the ache in her limbs, the tenderness in her belly, the raw feeling in her throat from cold and tears and screaming. She was lying on something soft, wrapped in blankets that smelled of herbs and wool, and there was warmth pressing against her side, a solid presence that her wolf recognized before her mind did. She opened her eyes. The room was large but not ostentatious, its stone walls softened by tapestries in deep greens and golds. A fire crackled in an enormous hearth across from the bed, casting dancing shadows across the ceiling. But Neve barely registered any of this, because all of her attention had fixed on the man sitting in a chair beside the bed. No, not sitting. He was slumped in the chair, his massive frame folded into a position that looked profoundly uncomfortable, his scarred face slack with exhausted sleep. In the firelight, she could see those scars more clearly, 3 parallel lines that ran from his left temple to his jaw, as though some great beast had tried to tear his face off. His dark hair was disheveled, falling across his forehead, and his hands, those huge, powerful hands that had carried her through the storm, were curled loosely in his lap. He was beautiful. The thought came unbidden and unwelcome, and Neve tried to push it away. She had thought Lucian beautiful once, and look where that had gotten her. She would not make the same mistake twice. She would not let a handsome face and a mate bond she had never asked for cloud her judgment. But even as she thought it, she could feel the bond pulsing between them, warm and insistent, and her wolf was pressing against her consciousness with an urgency that was almost painful. Mate, it whispered. Ours. Safe. Home. Shut up, she told it fiercely. We don't know him. We don't know anything about him except that he's the alpha king of a territory everyone fears, and he's been hiding from a prophecy for 3 years. That doesn't exactly scream trustworthy. Her wolf subsided, but it didn't retreat. It crouched at the edge of her awareness, watching, waiting, its golden eyes fixed on the sleeping man with an intensity that made Neve uncomfortable. She tried to sit up, and the movement sent a lance of pain through her midsection. She gasped, her hand flying to her belly, and terror flooded through her. The baby. The bleeding. Had she? The child is safe. His voice was rough with sleep, and when Neve's eyes snapped back to his face, she found him watching her with those storm-gray eyes. No gold now, just gray. But there was something in their depths that made her breath catch. A hunger held on a tight leash, a desperate hope battling with old grief. My healer says you'll both be fine, given time and rest. He hadn't moved from his chair, hadn't tried to touch her or crowd her, and some small part of Neve noted that, with confused gratitude. After months of Lucian's casual possessiveness, the deliberate distance felt strange. The mate bond sustained you through the worst of it. You lost more blood than should be survivable, and your core temperature. He stopped, his jaw tightening. You should be dead. Both of you. But we're not. Neve's voice came out as a croak, and she saw him flinch at the sound of it. No, you're not. He rose from the chair, and she couldn't help the way her body tensed, couldn't stop her wolf from raising its hackles even as it simultaneously yearned toward him. He was so big. She had known he was large when he carried her, but seeing him standing, she realized that he dwarfed every other man she had ever met. He had to be nearly 7 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to block a doorway, and muscles that spoke of a lifetime of violence. But he didn't approach her. Instead, he moved to a small table near the fire and poured water from a pitcher into a cup. When he brought it to her, he stopped several feet from the bed and held it out, waiting for her to take it rather than pressing it into her hands. You need to drink, he said when she didn't move. You're dehydrated. The cold does that. Neve reached out slowly, her fingers trembling as they closed around the cup. Their hands didn't touch. He had been careful about that, she realized. But even across the inches that separated them, she could feel the mate bond singing with electricity, urging her closer, urging her to touch. She drank the water instead, forcing herself to go slowly despite the desperate thirst clawing at her throat. He watched her without speaking, and when she had drained the cup, he took it back with that same careful distance and refilled it. My name is Corvus, he said as he handed her the second cup. Corvus Duskwalker. You're in my territory, in my home. You're safe here. Corvus. The name suited him, dark and sharp and somehow solitary. She drank more water, using the motion to buy herself time to think. Her wolf was no help. It had gone quiet, but she could feel it watching the Alpha King with an intensity that bordered on obsession. I'm Neve. He said her name like it was something precious, something he had been waiting to speak for a long time. I know. You spoke it in your sleep, when the fever was at its worst. You said a lot of things. Cold dread washed through her. What had she said? What secrets had she spilled while her body fought for survival? Had she spoken of Lucian? Of the rejection? Of the shame that still burned like acid in her chest? Corvus seemed to read the fear in her face, because he shook his head slowly. Nothing you need to be ashamed of. Mostly you spoke to your child, promised it that you would protect it, that you would love it, that you wouldn't let anyone hurt it. The gentleness in his voice was worse than cruelty would have been. Neve felt tears burning behind her eyes, and she blinked them back fiercely, refusing to cry in front of this stranger who was also somehow not a stranger at all. You're the Alpha King, she said, and was proud of how steady her voice emerged. The one they say is mad. The one who's been hiding from a prophecy for 3 years. Something flickered in his gray eyes. Pain, maybe, or resignation. They say a lot of things about me. Some of them are even true. Which parts? He was silent for a long moment, and Neve had the sense that he was weighing his words carefully. I have been absent from the affairs of the other packs for 3 years. Yes. As for why? He stopped, and she saw his hands clench briefly at his sides before he forced them to relax. That's a longer story. One that can wait until you're stronger. And the prophecy? She pushed, even though some part of her warned that she might not want to know the answer. They say you were marked for a fated mate. They say that's why you retreated into your fortress. Because you refused to claim her. The gold was back in his eyes now, bleeding into the gray like sunrise bleeding into storm clouds. The prophecy said that my fated mate would come to me in the dying of the year, marked by blood and betrayal, carrying a life that would change the world. His voice was rough, almost harsh, but underneath it she heard something that sounded like awe. They said she would be cast out by one who didn't deserve her, and that I would find her in the snow, dying. They said the bond would burn brighter than any in memory, and that together we would usher in a new age. Neve stared at him, her heart pounding. That's me. You think the prophecy is about me? I don't think it. I know it. He took a step closer, and then another, until he was standing at the edge of the bed, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. I've known since I first touched you. Since your wolf rose to meet mine and the bond sparked between us. I've been waiting for you, Neve. I've been hiding, yes, but not because I refused to claim you, because I was afraid. Afraid of what? Of not being worthy. The admission seemed to cost him something. She saw his jaw tighten, saw the muscles in his neck cord with tension. The prophecy speaks of greatness, of change, of a love that will reshape the world. And I am... He gestured at his scarred face, at his massive, battle-hardened body. I am a monster that children whisper about to scare each other. I am a weapon forged in war and tempered in blood. What right do I have to a fated mate? What right do I have to the peace the prophecy promises? Neve should have been afraid of his intensity, of the raw emotion pouring through the bond between them. But her wolf was pressing forward now, rising to meet his pain, with something that felt dangerously like understanding. You're not a monster, she whispered, and she didn't know where the words came from. Monsters don't carry dying women through blizzards. Monsters don't sit vigil at bedsides and sleep in chairs when there's a perfectly good. She stopped, suddenly realizing where she was lying. This wasn't a guest chamber. The room was too large, the furnishings too personal. The tapestries on the walls bore the Duskwalker crest, and the scent that clung to the blankets was his scent. This is your bed. You gave me your bed. You needed warmth. This is the warmest room in the keep, and the bed has been built up with furs. He said it like it was nothing, like any alpha would have done the same, but Neve knew that wasn't true. Most alphas she knew would have put a rejected, pregnant she-wolf in the servants' quarters at best. Where did you sleep? He nodded toward the chair, and something twisted in Neve's chest. That chair looked hard and uncomfortable, far too small for a man of his size. He must have been in agony, folding himself into it night after night. How long have I been here? 3 days. He said it simply, without emphasis, but Neve heard what he didn't say. 3 days of watching over her? 3 days of sleeping in that wretched chair. 3 days of holding himself back from the mate bond that must have been screaming at him to claim what was his. Why? The question slipped out before she could stop it, raw and desperate. Why didn't you... I was unconscious. I was helpless. Why didn't you just... She couldn't finish the sentence, but Corvus seemed to understand. His eyes flashed gold, and for a moment she saw something fierce and possessive in their depths, something that made her wolf keen with longing. But then it was banked, controlled, forced back behind walls of iron will. Because you are not mine to take, he said quietly. You are only mine to receive, if you choose to give yourself. And you have been taken from enough already, Neve. You have been used and rejected and cast out into the cold to die. I will not add to the list of those who have hurt you. Whatever happens between us, whatever you decide, it will be your choice, your decision. I will take nothing that isn't freely offered. The tears she had been fighting broke free then, streaming down her cheeks in hot trails. She had been so afraid. All through the long months of her betrothal to Lucian, all through the nightmare of her rejection and exile, she had been afraid. Of being owned, of being used, of being nothing more than a vessel for someone else's desires. And now this scarred, terrifying Alpha King was kneeling at her bedside. When had he knelt? She hadn't noticed him moving, and promising her something she had never dared to hope for: choice, agency, the right to decide her own fate. "You could have claimed the bond while I slept," she said, her voice breaking. "You could have marked me, and I never would have known until it was done." "Why?" "Because a bond claimed without consent is no bond at all." His voice was fierce, almost angry, but she knew instinctively that the anger wasn't directed at her. "It's a chain, a cage, and I have been in chains, Neve. I have been caged. I would not inflict that on anyone, least of all you." She looked at his scars then, really looked, and saw them for what they were. Not just marks of battle, but marks of suffering. Someone had hurt this man. Someone had tried to break him. And yet, here he knelt, offering her gentleness when he had every right to demand submission. Her wolf was howling now, pressing against her consciousness with urgent need. "Accept him," it begged. "He is ours. He is safe. Let me touch him." Not yet. Neve told it firmly, but some of the fear was fading from her heart. Not yet, but maybe soon. "I need time," she said aloud, and watched his face carefully for signs of anger or disappointment. There were none. Only a slow nod, and something that looked almost like relief. "You have all the time you need. This room is yours for as long as you want it. I'll have a proper bed brought to my study. The pack healer will check on you regularly, and if there's anything you need, anything at all, you have only to ask." And the bond? She could feel it pulsing between them, growing stronger by the moment. Already it was harder to think clearly when he was near, harder to remember why she should be cautious. What happens if I can't? Then the bond remains incomplete, and I learn to live with the ache. He said it like it was a simple thing, like the rejection of a fated mate wouldn't destroy him. But she could see the truth in his eyes, could feel it through the thread that connected them. This would break him. If she walked away, he would survive, but he would never be whole again. The same was true for her. She knew that with a certainty that went beyond logic or reason. The mate bond had taken root in her heart, and ripping it out would leave wounds that would never fully heal. But he was still giving her the choice. Even knowing what it would cost him, he was still giving her the right to refuse. "I need time," she said again, and this time it wasn't a defense. It was a promise, a beginning. Corvus nodded once more, then rose to his feet. "Rest. Eat when you're hungry. I'll have food sent up. And Neve?" He paused at the door, looking back at her with those storm-gray eyes. "Whatever you decide, whatever happens between us, you're safe here. You and your child. No one will hurt you in my territory. I swear it on my blood and my bond and every ancestor who ever carried my name." He left before she could respond, and Neve was alone with the crackling fire and the warmth of his scent still lingering in the air. She pressed her hand to her belly, feeling the flutter of her child's heartbeat beneath her palm. The mate bond hummed in her chest, insistent and patient, and strangely hopeful. For the first time since Lucian's betrayal, Neve allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she might actually be safe. The days that followed settled into a strange kind of rhythm. Neve spent most of her time in Corvus's chambers. Her chambers now, she had to keep reminding herself, resting and recovering and trying to make sense of the chaos her life had become. The pack healer, a brisk woman named Mira with kind eyes and steady hands, came twice daily to check on her and the baby. The pregnancy was progressing well, Mira assured her. The mate bond had done more than just save their lives. It had strengthened them both in ways that defied medical explanation. True to his word, Corvus had moved his belongings to a study elsewhere in the keep. But he visited every evening, bringing her meals himself rather than leaving them to the servants, and sitting with her while she ate. He never pushed, never demanded. He simply asked about her day, told her stories of the territory and its history, and listened when she felt like talking. She found herself telling him things she had never told anyone. About her mother, who had died when she was young, and the grandmother who had raised her on tales of the old ways, stories of mixed-blood wolves who carried dormant gifts, powers that would only awaken when the bloodline found its true purpose. About her hopes and dreams before Lucian had crushed them. About the fear that still woke her in the small hours of the night, the terror that someone would come and rip away the fragile peace she had found. Corvus listened to all of it, and when her voice broke or her eyes filled with tears, he didn't try to fix it. He simply sat with her in the pain, a solid presence that asked for nothing and offered everything. On the 5th day, Neve woke to shouting. She sat up in bed, her heart racing, her wolf snapping to attention. The sounds were coming from somewhere below, raised voices heavy with anger and contempt. She couldn't make out the words, but she recognized the tone. She had heard it before, in the great hall of Frostborn Manor, when Lucian had turned the pack against her. Before she could think better of it, she was on her feet and moving toward the door. Her body ached in protest, still weak from her ordeal, but the need to know what was happening overrode everything else. She followed the sound down a spiral staircase and through a maze of corridors until she found herself outside a set of massive double doors that stood slightly ajar. Through the gap, she could see a long room with a table running down its center. A council chamber, she realized, and seated around that table were a dozen wolves, their faces ranging from concerned to openly hostile. At the head of the table stood Corvus, his massive frame taut with barely leashed fury. And facing him was a gray-haired woman whose lip was curled in undisguised disgust. "You cannot be serious, Alpha." The woman's voice dripped with contempt. "You would bring a pregnant, rejected she-wolf into our pack? Make her your Luna? She's damaged goods, cast out by her own people for crimes we can only guess at. The Frostborn Alpha himself declared her unworthy. Are we to set ourselves above his judgment? Lucian Frostborn is a coward and a zealot who threw a pregnant woman into a blizzard to die." Corvus's voice was ice and iron, and Neve saw several of the wolves at the table flinch at its force. "His judgment means nothing to me. But what do we know of her?" A man this time, younger than the gray-haired woman, but with the same calculating look in his eyes. "She appears out of nowhere, claiming to be your fated mate, carrying another man's child. How convenient. Perhaps she sought out the Duskwalker territory deliberately. Perhaps she is a spy, or worse. She nearly died reaching our borders." Corvus's hands had curled into fists at his sides. She collapsed in the snow with blood between her legs and ice in her lungs. No spy is that dedicated to their cover. "So she says," the gray-haired woman sneered. "But we have only her word for what happened. For all we know, she could have staged the entire thing." "Enough." The word cracked through the chamber like a whip, and every wolf at the table froze. Neve saw some of them bare their throats instinctively, responding to the raw alpha power in Corvus's voice. "You forget yourselves. You forget who rules this territory and by what right." "We forget nothing, Alpha." The gray-haired woman had recovered her composure, though Neve noticed she didn't quite meet Corvus's eyes. "We simply seek to protect the pack from potential threats. Surely you can understand our concern. A rejected she-wolf with no family, no pack, no protection. She brings nothing to an alliance. She is a liability, a mouth to feed, a burden on resources that could be better spent elsewhere. She brings something far more valuable than political alliance. Corvus moved then, circling the table with predatory grace, and Neve watched the wolves shrink back as he passed. She brings the mate bond, the sacred connection that our ancestors valued above all else, the bond that makes pack and family and meaning from strangers and chaos. The bond can be broken, the younger man said, and there was something ugly in his voice. There are rituals. The sound that came from Corvus was not human. It was a snarl, a roar, a promise of violence that made the stone walls shake. In a movement too fast to follow, he slammed his fist through the oak table, sending splinters flying in all directions. "The next person who suggests breaking the mate bond," he said, and his voice was death itself, "will answer to my claws. Is that understood?" Silence. Absolute trembling silence. She is my mate. Corvus straightened, pulling his bloodied fist from the ruins of the table. She is your Luna, and anyone who disrespects her, anyone who looks at her sideways, speaks to her with less than complete courtesy, or so much as thinks about causing her harm, will face me in the challenge ring. I will defend her honor with my life if necessary, and I will tear the throat out of anyone who threatens her. One by one, the wolves around the table bowed their heads in submission. Even the gray-haired woman lowered her eyes, though Neve saw the resentment burning in them. "You may have your political concerns and your calculations of worth," Corvus continued, his voice still edged with threat. "You may keep them to yourselves. Neve is under my protection, and by extension so is the child she carries. Whatever she needs, she receives. Whatever she wants, she is given. This is not a request. It is a command from your Alpha King. Defy me at your peril." Neve stepped back from the door, her heart pounding, her wolf howling with something that felt terrifyingly like triumph. She had expected him to be possessive, the mate bond demanded as much. But this was something else. This was respect. This was dignity. He hadn't called her his property or his prize. He had called her his Luna. He hadn't demanded submission from her. He had demanded it for her, from wolves who would have torn her apart with words and contempt. He was nothing like Lucian. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. Lucian had talked about protection, about provision, about what he would give her in exchange for her obedience. Corvus spoke of what he would do for her, asked nothing in return, and tore apart anyone who suggested she was less than worthy. Neve fled back to her chambers before anyone could discover her eavesdropping. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing, when Corvus knocked on the door an hour later. "Come in," she called, and was surprised by how steady her voice sounded. He entered quietly, and she saw that someone had bandaged his hand. The knuckles were still swollen beneath the white cloth, and she felt a strange pang at the sight. "You heard," he said. It wasn't a question. "I heard." She met his eyes, and something shifted in her chest, some wall crumbling, some defense giving way. "You defended me, to your own counsel. You called me your Luna. You are my Luna." He said it simply, without arrogance or demand. "Whether you choose to accept the title is up to you, but that is what the mate bond makes you. My equal, my partner, the other half of my heart. I'm pregnant with another man's child." The words came out harsh, bitter. "A man who rejected me, who threw me out to die. Doesn't that bother you?" "No." The answer was immediate and fierce. "The child is yours, Neve. It grows beneath your heart, sheltered by your body, loved by your soul. That makes it precious beyond measure. That makes it mine to protect, if you'll allow it." Lucian called it an abomination. He said it stole his youth, his future. Lucian is a fool. Corvus crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt before her, putting himself at her eye level. This close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the silver threads just starting to appear in his dark hair. He was older than he had first appeared, she realized. Not ancient, but seasoned, scarred by more than just the marks on his face. Lucian saw only what he could take from you, Corvus said, his voice rough with emotion. He saw a body to use, a political alliance to exploit, a future he could control. He never saw you, Neve. He never saw the fierce heart and the stubborn spirit and the love so deep it carried you through a blizzard when anyone else would have lain down and died. The tears were coming again, and this time, Neve didn't try to stop them. They streamed down her face as Corvus reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed them from her cheeks with gentle fingers. I see you, he whispered. I see you, Neve. And I see that child growing inside you. The child you've risked everything to protect. That child is a blessing, not a curse. It's a gift, not a burden. And if you'll let me, if you'll give me the chance, I would be honored to raise it as my own. Something broke inside her then, the last of her resistance, the final wall of fear. Her wolf surged forward, and before she could think, before she could second-guess herself, she had closed the distance between them. She didn't kiss him. She wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Instead, she pressed her forehead to his, breathing in his scent, pine and wood smoke and home, and let the mate bond pulse between them, warm and patient and full of promise. Time, she whispered. I still need time. You have it. His voice was rough, strained with the effort of holding himself back, but his hand stayed gentle on her shoulders. You have all of it. Take what you need. They stayed like that for a long moment, foreheads pressed together, breathing in sync, the bond humming contentedly in the space between their hearts. Neve didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if she could really let herself trust again, really let herself love. But for the first time since Lucian's betrayal, she felt something stirring in her chest that felt dangerously, wonderfully like hope. It was enough. For now, it was enough. The days that followed took on a rhythm Neve hadn't expected. A gentle cadence of healing and discovery that felt almost dangerous in its normalcy. She woke each morning in the massive bed that still smelled faintly of Corvus, though he never joined her there, and she found herself reaching across the empty sheets before she was fully conscious, searching for warmth that wasn't there. He kept his word. Every night, he slept in the chair by the fire, a blanket thrown over his massive frame, his breathing deep and steady through the darkness. Sometimes she would wake in the small hours and find him watching her, his golden eyes reflecting the dying embers, and something would pass between them that made her heart stutter in her chest. But he never touched her without permission, never crowded her, never made demands. It was, she was beginning to realize, the most seductive thing anyone had ever done. On the fifth morning, Neve felt strong enough to leave the chambers on her own. Mira had been coming and going, bringing meals and fresh clothing and gentle conversation. But Neve was restless. Her wolf was restless too, pacing inside her with an energy she hadn't felt in months, not since Lucian's pack magic had suppressed it into near silence. She found Corvus in the great hall, and in the clear morning light, she could finally see the full extent of the damage from the council meeting. The oak table was barely recognizable, its center caved in where his fist had struck. Workers were dismantling the shattered pieces while he reviewed documents nearby, and when he looked up and saw her standing in the doorway, his face transformed. The stern lines softened. The tension around his eyes eased. He looked, she thought with a flutter in her chest, like a man who had been holding his breath and finally remembered how to exhale. You're up. He rose immediately, crossing to her in long strides. Should you be walking? Mira said the healers wanted you to rest for at least another. If I rest any more, I'll lose my mind. Neve smiled slightly, surprising herself. When was the last time she had smiled without forcing it? I needed to move, to see something besides those four walls, beautiful as they are. Corvus studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. Then let me show you the grounds, if you're willing. She was willing. More than willing, she realized, as she took the arm he offered and let him guide her through the stone corridors of Duskwalker Keep. She wanted to know this place, this territory that might become her home, these halls that might shelter her child. She wanted to know him, the Alpha King who slept in chairs and defended her with bleeding fists and looked at her like she was something precious rather than something broken. The keep was massive, carved into the mountain itself, with windows that looked out over snow-covered peaks and valleys shrouded in morning mist. Corvus explained the history as they walked, how the Duskwalker pack had held this territory for 7 generations, how the fortress had been built to withstand sieges from rival packs and human armies alike, how his father had ruled here before him and his grandfather before that. "And you?" Neve asked as they paused at a window overlooking a frozen courtyard. "Mira said you hadn't been seen in 3 years, that you've been away." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Not away. Here. Just not ruling, not living, really. Existing." "Why?" For a long moment he was silent. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough, scraped raw with old pain. "There was a prophecy, spoken by the moon priestess at the winter solstice, 3 years ago, the same night Lucian gave me the cursed wound that still plagues me. He ambushed me at the border after the ceremony, drove a blade worked with dark magic into my side. The priestess said I was marked for a fated mate, a true bond, the kind that comes once in a generation. She said this mate would save me or destroy me, depending on choices not yet made. But the curse made me weak, vulnerable. I retreated here not just because of the prophecy, but because I was in no condition to face either my enemies or my fate." Neve's breath caught. "And you didn't want that?" "I didn't want to destroy anyone." He turned to face her fully, and she saw the haunted shadows in his golden eyes. "I've seen what I can do when the battle rage takes me, Neve. I've seen the damage I'm capable of. The prophecy said my mate would be my salvation or my damnation, but what if I was hers? What if claiming her meant breaking her?" "So you hid." The words came out softer than she intended. "You stayed away from everyone, refused to claim anyone because you were afraid of what you might do." "I stayed away because I knew what I was." His laugh was bitter. "A monster wearing a king's crown, a beast pretending to be a man. Who would want that for a mate?" Before she could think, before she could stop herself, Neve reached up and touched the scars on his face, the raised ridges that cut across his cheek and brow, telling a story of violence survived. He went absolutely still beneath her fingers, barely breathing. "I would," she whispered. "I do." The bond flared between them, hot and bright, and his eyes blazed gold as he fought to hold himself in check. She could feel his wolf straining at the edges of his control, could feel the hunger roaring through the connection they shared. But his voice, when he spoke, was steady. "Don't say things you don't mean, Neve. I can wait. I can wait as long as you need." "I mean it." And she did. She realized with a shock of clarity that cut through all her fear and doubt. "You're not a monster, Corvus. Monsters don't sleep in chairs to make frightened women feel safe. Monsters don't defend pregnant strangers to their own counsels. Monsters don't—" A commotion from the courtyard below interrupted her. Shouting voices, the clatter of hooves on frozen stone, the sharp bark of wolves shifting to human form. Corvus's head snapped toward the window and she felt the instant tension that seized his frame. "What is it?" she asked, but he was already moving, his hand closing around hers with protective urgency. "Stay behind me," he said, and the command in his voice was pure alpha. No room for argument, No space for disobedience. Whatever happens, stay behind me. They reached the great hall just as the outer doors burst open, admitting a blast of frigid air and a procession of wolves she didn't recognize. They wore the silver and ice blue of Frostborn colors, and at their head walked a figure that made Neve's blood freeze in her veins. Not Lucian. This was a woman. Tall, willowy, with hair the color of fresh snow and eyes like chips of frozen lake water. She moved with the lethal grace of a predator, and the wolves flanking her parted around obstacles with military precision. Lady Seraphina. Corvus's voice was cold iron, and Neve felt his hand tighten on hers. You've traveled far from Frostborn territory. I wasn't aware we had an audience scheduled. We don't. The woman's smile was beautiful and utterly without warmth. I've come as an emissary, Alpha King. My brother sends his regards, and his demands. Her brother. Neve's stomach lurched as understanding crashed over her. This was Lucian's sister, Seraphina Frostborn, the true power behind the Frostborn pack. She had met her only once, at the betrothal ceremony, and had thought her beautiful in the way that ice storms were beautiful, devastating and deadly. I don't receive demands from Lucian Frostborn, Corvus said flatly. I receive nothing from oathbreakers who cast pregnant women into blizzards to die. Ah. Seraphina's pale eyes found Neve where she stood half-hidden behind Corvus's bulk. So she did survive. We wondered. Lucian was so certain the storm would take care of things, but I told him he underestimated her. Sturdy breeding stock, even if the bloodline is questionable. Neve felt her wolf snarl at the insult, felt claws prick at her fingertips as rage flooded through her. But before she could speak, Corvus stepped forward, putting himself more completely between her and the Frostborn delegation. You will not speak of my mate that way. His voice had dropped to a dangerous rumble, and Neve saw several of the Frostborn wolves flinch. You will not speak of her at all. State your business and leave my territory, or state nothing and be carried out in pieces. Those are your options. Seraphina's lips curved. Such passion. Such protectiveness. Tell me, Alpha King, does she know what you are? What you did in the border wars? The villages you burned? The innocents you slaughtered? I know what I am. Corvus didn't rise to the bait. Does Lucian know what you are, Lady Seraphina? Does he know which of you truly leads the pureblood movement? Does he know that his sister has been eliminating pregnant she-wolves across 3 territories while he plays at prophecy? The silence that fell was absolute. Neve saw shock flicker across Seraphina's perfect features, just for an instant, just a heartbeat, before her mask slammed back into place. You've been busy, Seraphina said softly. Gathering intelligence while you hid in your mountain fortress. I underestimated you. Most do. It's a useful quality in an enemy. Corvus's smile was all teeth. Now, your business. Quickly. Seraphina reached into her cloak and withdrew a scroll sealed with Frostborn ice blue wax. She held it up, letting the light catch the silver filigree worked into the ribbon. Lucian demands the return of his wife, she said, each word precise and sharp. The pregnancy makes the situation complicated. By Frostborn law, she carries his heir. Regardless of his rejection, regardless of anything else, the child belongs to our pack. She's not his wife. Neve's voice rang out before she could stop herself. He rejected me publicly, before witnesses. He dissolved the bond. I'm nothing to him. Nothing. You're the vessel carrying his bloodline. Seraphina's eyes were chips of ice. That makes you property of the Frostborn pack until the child is delivered. After that, she shrugged elegantly. After that, your fate is between you and whatever gods listen to mongrel prayers. Corvus's growl shook the walls. Neve felt it vibrate through the floor, through her bones, through the mate bond that pulsed between them. Several of the Frostborn wolves dropped to their knees involuntarily, responding to the raw power of an Alpha King's rage. Get out. The words were barely human. Get out of my territory. Take your demands and your threats and your poisoned sister back to Lucian, and tell him this. If he comes for her, if he sends anyone for her, if he so much as thinks too loudly in her direction, I will tear out his throat and mount his head on a pike at the border. And then I will come for everyone who ever followed him, everyone who ever supported his pure blood madness, and I will end them, one by one. Seraphina held his gaze for a long moment. Then, slowly, she smiled. The full moon is in 3 weeks, she said conversationally. I've heard interesting things about what the full moon does to you, Alpha King. Old wounds that reopen, old weaknesses that return. She tucked the scroll back into her cloak. Lucian will come for what's his, and when he does, well, we'll see whose mate ends up mounted on a pike. She turned and swept out the way she had come, her wolves falling in behind her with military precision. The doors slammed shut in their wake, and the great hall fell silent except for the crackling of the hearth fires. Corvus stood motionless, his back still to Neve, his hands clenched at his sides. She could see the fine tremor running through him, the effort of containing the violence that wanted to erupt. Corvus. She reached out, touched his shoulder gently. Corvus, look at me. When he turned, his eyes were still blazing gold, and she could see the beast lurking just beneath the surface of the man. But when she didn't flinch, didn't step back, something in him seemed to settle. The full moon, he said roughly. She was right. There's an old wound, a cursed blade, from the border wars. Lucian gave it to me 3 years ago, the same battle where I lost my brother. After that, the prophecy came, and the weakness, and I had nothing left to fight for, so I stopped fighting entirely. He exhaled slowly. It flares every full moon. Makes me weak. Makes me vulnerable. Then we have 3 weeks to prepare. Neve. He cupped her face in his massive hands, and the tenderness in his touch made her heart ache. You don't have to stay for this. I can send you somewhere safe, another territory, somewhere they won't find you. You don't have to. I'm not running again. The words surprised her, but she meant them. I spent months running from Lucian, hiding from his pack, pretending I was less than I am. I'm done running. Whatever comes, we face it together. You barely know me. I know enough. She covered his hands with hers, pressing into his warmth. I know you, Corvus. The mate bond knows you, and I'm not leaving. Something shifted in his expression. Wonder, disbelief, and beneath it all, a fierce, blazing hope. He pressed his forehead to hers, breathing deeply, and she felt the bond pulse between them, steady, patient, full of promise. Together then, he whispered. Whatever comes. In the weeks that followed, Neve learned what it meant to prepare for war. Corvus threw open the keep's stores, distributing weapons and armor to every wolf capable of fighting. Scouts were sent to patrol the borders. Messages flew to allied packs, calling in old debts and forging new alliances. The Duskwalker territory transformed from a peaceful mountain stronghold into a fortress ready for siege. And through it all, Neve found herself growing closer to the Alpha King. It was the small things at first. The way he always ensured she ate before he touched his own food. The way he appeared at her side whenever she felt anxious, as if the bond itself had alerted him to her distress. The way he listened when she spoke, really listened, with his whole attention, as if her words were precious treasures he wanted to hoard. Then it was the larger things. Training sessions where he taught her to defend herself, his hands gentle as he corrected her stance. Long walks through the keep where he shared stories of his childhood, his parents, the brother he had lost in the border wars. Quiet evenings by the fire where they sat in comfortable silence, not needing words to feel connected. One night, 2 weeks before the full moon, Neve woke from a nightmare. She was back in the blizzard, the cold cutting through her like knives, Lucian's voice echoing through the howling wind. Abomination, tainted blood. You stole my youth, my future. She was dying. She knew it. And the worst part was that part of her wanted to let go. Neve, Neve, wake up. You're safe. I have you. Corvus's voice cut through the dream, and she gasped awake to find herself cradled against his chest. He had left his chair, crossed to the bed, gathered her into his arms. She could feel his heart pounding against her cheek, could smell pine and wood smoke and home. I'm sorry, she gasped. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Hush. He stroked her hair with infinite gentleness. You have nothing to apologize for. The nightmares are natural. They'll fade in time. Will they? She hated how small her voice sounded. Sometimes I feel like I'll never be free of him. Like he's still inside me, telling me I'm worthless, telling me my child is a curse. Your child is a miracle. Corvus's voice was fierce. And you are the strongest woman I have ever known. You survived the impossible. You carried life through death. And you found your way here, to me. That's not weakness, Neve. That's power. She looked up at him in the darkness, and something cracked open in her chest. Kiss me, she whispered. He went still. Neve, I'm not asking because I'm scared. I'm not asking because I'm confused. I'm asking because I want you. She reached up, touched the scars on his face, traced the lines of damage with reverent fingers. I want my mate. The sound he made was barely human, a growl and a groan and a prayer all tangled together. And then his mouth was on hers, and everything else fell away. The kiss was gentle at first, questioning, giving her room to change her mind. But when she pressed closer, when she opened to him with a soft moan, the gentleness burned away. He kissed her like a man dying of thirst who had finally found water. He kissed her like she was sacred. He kissed her like she was his. Neve. Her name was a broken thing on his lips. My Neve. My mate. Yours. She breathed against his mouth. I'm yours. He pulled back with visible effort, his eyes blazing gold, his chest heaving. Not tonight. Not like this. Not when you're raw from nightmares. Not when the threat is hanging over us. When I take you, when I claim you fully, I want it to be in victory. I want it to be in joy. And if we don't survive the full moon, we will. He pressed his forehead to hers. We will, because I have something worth surviving for now. I have you. They lay tangled together until morning, and for the first time, Corvus didn't return to his chair. He stayed, his arm around her, his breath warm against her hair, his wolf and hers humming in quiet contentment. The bond between them deepened with every passing day. Neve could feel it, a golden thread that connected them across distance, that let her sense his moods and needs even when they were apart. When she woke from nightmares, she felt his response instantly, a wave of comfort and protection that wrapped around her like a blanket. But she could also feel his weakness growing. As the full moon approached, the cursed wound on his side began to ache. She saw him falter during training, saw him grip his ribs with white-knuckled hands when he thought no one was looking. The curse was eating at him, sapping his strength, and there was nothing any of them could do but wait. 3 days before the full moon, Lucian's final message arrived. Not a scroll this time, not an emissary. A wolf's head, mounted on a stake at the border. The head of a Duskwalker scout, one of the young ones who had volunteered to watch the passes. His eyes had been gouged out, and carved into his forehead in rough letters was a single word. Soon. Neve was in the great hall when Corvus received the news. She saw his face go white. saw his hands begin to shake, and she felt something stir inside her, something fierce and protective and utterly without fear. "He wants us scared," she said, rising to stand beside her mate. "He wants us cowering, waiting for him to come. That's not going to happen." No." She turned to face the assembled wolves, the council and the warriors, and everyone who had gathered when word spread of Lucian's threat. "I know what you think of me, a pregnant, rejected she-wolf who stumbled into your territory half dead. But I am your Luna, whether I've been crowned or not. The mate bond makes me Corvus's equal. And I am telling you, we are not going to cower." Mira stepped forward from the crowd. "What would you have us do, Luna?" The title sent a thrill through her, not fear this time, but purpose, power, the sense of something awakening that had been dormant for too long. "We prepare," Neve said. "We fortify. And when Lucian comes, we show him what it means to threaten the Duskwalker pack." The cheer that rose from the assembled wolves shook the rafters. And when Neve turned to find Corvus watching her, she saw something in his eyes that looked like awe. That night, as they prepared for bed, he took her hands and raised them to his lips. "You were magnificent today," he said quietly. "You were everything a Luna should be. I was terrified. That's what makes it magnificent." He smiled, and even through the exhaustion and pain, she saw the love blazing in his golden eyes. "My mate, my queen, whatever comes, I thank the fates for leading you to me." Neve kissed him softly, tenderly, pouring all her hope and fear and growing love into the contact. And in her belly, the child stirred, a flutter of movement, the first she had felt. With it came a strange warmth spreading through her veins, a tingling sensation in her fingertips that faded as quickly as it had come. She dismissed it as the intensity of the moment, but somewhere deep inside, her grandmother's stories whispered of dormant gifts finally waking. "Soon," she whispered against his lips, "whatever comes, soon." The full moon rose blood-red over the Duskwalker territory, casting crimson shadows across the snow-covered peaks. Neve stood at the window of their chambers, her hand pressed against her swelling belly, feeling the child stir restlessly within her. The baby knew. Somehow, impossibly, the life growing inside her sensed the danger that was coming, and it moved with an urgency that matched the pounding of her own heart. Behind her, she could hear Corvus struggling to buckle his armor. The cursed wound on his side had been bleeding freely since sunset. The old magic that Lucian had worked into the injury 3 years ago now tearing at him with renewed vengeance. She turned to find him gripping the bedpost, his face ashen beneath the scars, his golden eyes dimmed with pain. "Let me help," she said, crossing to him. "I can manage. You can barely stand." She pressed her palm against his chest, feeling the rapid thunder of his heart. Through the mate bond, she could sense his pain as clearly as if it were her own, a hot, twisting agony that radiated from his side with every breath. "Corvus, please, let me." His jaw clenched, but he released the bedpost and allowed her to take over fastening the straps of his chestplate. His hands came up to rest on her shoulders, and even through the leather and steel, she felt the warmth of him, the desperate love that flowed through their connection. "If something happens to me tonight," he began. "Don't. Neve, I said don't." She looked up at him, fierce tears burning in her eyes. "You promised me we would survive this. You promised me you had something worth surviving for. So don't you dare start saying goodbye." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had escaped despite her efforts to hold them back. "I promised," he agreed quietly, "and I intend to keep that promise. But you need to know, if the worst happens, if Lucian breaks through our defenses, you run. You take our child, and you run, and you don't look back. I won't leave you. You will." His voice was gentle but implacable. "Because our child matters more than vengeance, more than pride, more than either of our lives. Promise me, Neve, if it comes to it, you run. She wanted to argue. Every fiber of her being screamed against the idea of fleeing while her mate faced death. But she felt the child move again, a flutter of life and possibility, and she understood what he was asking. It wasn't about doubting her strength or her courage. It was about protecting the future they had fought so hard to create. I promise, she whispered, but it won't come to that. A horn sounded in the distance, 3 long blasts that echoed off the mountain peaks and sent ravens screaming into the blood-red sky, the signal they had been dreading. Lucian's forces had been spotted approaching the main pass. They're here, Corvus said, and despite the pain that carved lines around his mouth, his eyes blazed with the fierce light of a warrior preparing for battle. Stay close to Mira. The inner keep is fortified. I'm not hiding in the keep. Neve squared her shoulders, feeling something ancient and powerful stirring in her blood. The sensation had been growing stronger over the past 3 days, a warmth that seemed to radiate from her womb and spread through her entire body. She didn't fully understand it, but she knew with absolute certainty that her place was at her mate's side. Where you go, I go. For a moment, she thought he would argue, but something in her expression must have convinced him, because he simply nodded and offered her his hand. Together then, always together. They descended to the great hall to find the Duskwalker warriors assembled and ready, their faces grim with determination. Mira stood at the front, a curved blade in each hand, her eyes glowing faintly amber with the power of her wolf. The council members who had once questioned Neve's presence now bowed their heads as she passed, acknowledging her as their Luna without hesitation. Report, Corvus commanded, and though his voice was steady, Neve felt through their bond how much the simple act of walking had cost him. The curse was draining him with every passing moment, and they all knew he would not be at full strength for this fight. 300 wolves, maybe more, the scout replied, his young face pale with fear. Coming through the main pass in formation, Lucian leads them personally. Neve's stomach clenched at the sound of her former betrothed's name. She could still hear his voice in her nightmares, still feel the phantom pain of his rejection searing through her chest. But alongside the fear, she felt something else rising. A cold, crystalline fury that burned away her terror and left only resolve in its wake. He wants to end this himself, she said. He wants to watch Corvus die, and then he wants to drag me back to face whatever twisted justice his cult has planned. He's welcome to try, Corvus growled, and for a moment, despite his weakness, he was every inch the Alpha King who had conquered these mountains. Form up, we meet them at the bridge. The stone bridge that spanned the Great Chasm was the only approach to the Duskwalker stronghold from the main pass, a natural choke point that would force Lucian's superior numbers to engage in smaller groups. It was their best hope of surviving the night, and everyone present knew it. They marched out into the moonlit darkness, the red light of the full moon casting everything in shades of blood and shadow. Neve stayed close to Corvus's side, her hand never leaving his, drawing what strength she could through the mate bond to help ease his pain. She felt him lean into her touch, felt his gratitude and love flowing back to her through their connection. The enemy appeared at the far end of the bridge as if manifesting from the darkness itself. Row upon row of wolves in human form, armed and armored, their eyes gleaming with fanatical fervor. And at their head, mounted on a massive black horse, rode Lucian Frostborn. He looked exactly as she remembered, golden-haired and handsome, with the kind of cruel beauty that had once made her heart flutter with naive hope. Now that same face made her skin crawl with revulsion. She saw him spot her across the chasm, saw his perfect lips curve into a smile that held no warmth at all. Neve. His voice carried clearly across the stone bridge, smooth and patronizing. My wayward bride, I see you've found yourself a new protector, a crippled, cursed king who can barely stand upright. Quite the step down from Frostborn power. I'd rather stand beside a wounded king than kneel to a false one, she called back, and she was proud that her voice didn't waver. You have no claim on me, Lucian. You cast me out. You called me tainted. The bond between us is severed. She felt her rage crystallizing into something cold and sharp. And let us be clear about the truth you tried to bury. You came to my chambers night after night during our courtship. You took what you wanted without a single thought of consequence. And then you had the audacity to shame me for carrying the child you put inside me, as if I had done it alone. You are not just cruel, Lucian. You are a coward and a hypocrite. There was never a bond between us, you stupid girl. Just a political arrangement that became inconvenient when you proved yourself to be damaged goods. His smile widened, cruel and cutting. But I still need you, I'm afraid. You're carrying proof of the old prophecy, mixed blood that will corrupt the purity of our race. The child must be destroyed, and you with it. Nothing personal. Corvus stepped forward, placing himself between Neve and Lucian's gaze. Even weakened, even bleeding from the cursed wound at his side, he radiated lethal intent. You'll have to go through me first, Frostborn, and I promise you, I'm not as weak as you seem to think. No? Lucian raised one elegant eyebrow. The curse I placed in that wound 3 years ago tells me differently. I can feel it working on you, Duskwalker. Feel it eating away at your strength, your power, your pathetic life force. By the time this night is over, you'll be nothing but a corpse at my feet, and your precious mate will watch you die before I take her back to face judgment. He raised his hand, and his forces began to advance across the bridge. What happened next would become legend among the mountain packs for generations to come. The Duskwalker wolves met the pureblood advance with savage ferocity, transformed into their beast forms, tearing into the enemy with teeth and claws. The narrow bridge became a maelstrom of fur and blood and screaming rage, wolves falling from both sides to plummet into the chasm below. Corvus fought at the front, his massive black wolf form devastating despite his weakness, each swipe of his claws taking down enemies before they could breach the line. But Neve could feel him fading. Through their bond, she felt every ounce of strength the curse stole from him, felt the darkness creeping in at the edges of his consciousness. He was fighting on sheer will alone, and that will was beginning to falter. Then she saw Lucian moving through the chaos, a blade of silver gleaming in his hand. He wasn't fighting. He was waiting, letting his followers die to clear a path, conserving his strength for the moment when Corvus would be too weak to defend himself. It happened faster than she could have imagined. One moment, Corvus was tearing out the throat of an enemy wolf. The next, his legs buckled beneath him, and he crashed to the blood-slicked stone of the bridge. His wolf form flickered and faded, leaving him human and vulnerable, the cursed wound on his side gaping open and pouring crimson onto the ground. Lucian was there in an instant, his boot pressing down on Corvus's chest, his silver blade raised for the killing blow. "Look at you," he sneered, pressing harder until Corvus gasped in agony. "The great Alpha King, brought low by a wound I gave him 3 years ago. You should have died then. Would have saved everyone a great deal of trouble." Neve was moving before she knew she had made the decision. She pushed through the fighting wolves, shoved past warriors who tried to hold her back, ran toward her fallen mate with a scream of fury and terror tearing from her throat. But it wasn't just rage that powered her movements. It was something else. Something that had been building inside her since the moment she learned she was carrying this child. A warmth that started in her womb and spread outward, filling every cell of her being with light and power that she didn't understand but knew instinctively how to use. She stepped between Lucian and Corvus just as the silver blade began its descent. The sword stopped 3 inches from her chest, halted by a barrier of silver light that erupted from her outstretched hands. The shock on Lucian's face would have been comical if the situation weren't so deadly. his perfect composure shattering as he staggered backward from the force of her power. "What?" he gasped. "That's impossible. You're nothing. You've always been nothing? I am everything." The words came from somewhere deep inside her, from a part of herself she was only now discovering. She could feel the child within her, lending its strength to hers, the ancient power of their combined bloodlines finally awakening after centuries of dormancy. "I am the mother of prophecy. I am the Luna Queen of the Duskwalker pack. And you made the worst mistake of your life when you cast me out into the snow." She advanced on him, and with each step, the silver light around her grew brighter. She felt the fighting around them stutter and stop, as wolves from both sides stared at the pregnant she-wolf who blazed like a fallen star in the blood-red moonlight. "You said my child stole your youth," she continued, her voice ringing clear across the bridge. "You said the pregnancy made me damaged goods. But this child is the greatest gift I've ever been given. Not because of what it will become, but because of what it made me realize I could be." She raised her hands, and a wave of protective energy exploded outward, throwing Lucian's remaining followers backward, sending them tumbling off the bridge or cowering in submission. The pureblood cult warriors who had seemed so threatening moments ago now scrambled to flee from the power radiating from her body. "Your child isn't a blessing," Lucian snarled, struggling to his feet. "It's an abomination. The prophecies are clear. Mixed blood will destroy everything we've built. You're carrying the end of our way of life in your belly, you stupid, naive—" "The prophecies say mixed blood will bring change," Neve interrupted. "Your pure blood prophecy and Corvus's prophecy, they speak of the same child, Lucian. The same event, seen through different eyes. You see destruction because destruction is all you understand. But what you call the end of your world, others call the beginning of something better." She stepped forward, the silver light intensifying. "And yes, it will destroy what you've built. Your hatred, your cruelty, your vision of a world where worth is determined by bloodlines rather than character. But destruction isn't always evil, Lucian. Sometimes, destruction is the only way to make room for something better." Behind her, she felt Corvus stirring. The energy she was channeling, it wasn't just protecting him, it was healing him. She could feel the curse in his wound burning away, consumed by the silver light that flowed from her hands. He rose to his feet, and when she turned to look at him, she saw his eyes blazing gold with renewed strength. "Mate," he breathed, awe and love and fierce pride all tangled together in that single word. "My magnificent mate." "Yours," she agreed. "And you're mine. And this ends now." They moved together, bonded wolves united in purpose, advancing on Lucian with predatory grace. He scrambled backward, his silver blade shaking in his grip, his handsome face twisted with disbelief and dawning terror. "You can't do this," he said, and for the first time Neve heard fear in his voice. "I am the alpha of the Frostborn pack. I am the chosen leader of the pureblood movement. You can't." "You're nothing but a vessel," Neve interrupted, throwing his own words back at him. "You have no power without a pack, and I don't see your pack standing with you now." She gestured at the bridge behind him, and he turned to find his remaining followers kneeling in submission, not to him, but to her. To the blazing silver light of the Luna Queen and the restored Alpha King who flanked her. Whatever hold he had possessed over them, it had shattered in the face of her power. "This is your judgment, Lucian Frostborn." Corvus's voice rang with the authority of an Alpha King pronouncing sentence. "For your crimes against the mountain packs, for the pregnant she-wolves you've murdered in the name of false prophecy, for the attack on my territory and the blood of my wolves staining this bridge, for the suffering you inflicted on my mate, and the life you tried to take from my unborn child." "You rejected me," Neve added, and her voice was steady as stone. "You cast me out into the snow to die. You called me tainted, damaged, worthless. Now the wolves reject you. Lucian lunged in one final desperate attack, but he never reached them. Corvus intercepted him mid-stride, his claws extending, his strength fully restored by the healing power that still flowed through the mate bond. He caught Lucian by the throat and lifted him off the ground as if he weighed nothing at all. "Any last words?" Corvus asked, and his voice was terribly calm. Lucian's handsome face contorted with hatred. "The prophecy will find another way. Others believe as I do. You've won nothing." "I've won everything," Corvus said simply. "I've won her." His claws tore through Lucian's throat in a spray of crimson, and the alpha of the Frostborn pack, the leader of the pureblood cult, fell lifeless to the blood-soaked bridge. For a long moment, silence reigned across the battlefield. Then, one by one, the surviving enemy wolves began to shift into their human forms, bowing their heads in submission to the Alpha King and his Luna Queen. The pureblood movement had died with its leader, and those who remained seemed almost relieved to be free of it. Neve swayed on her feet as the silver light finally began to fade, the power she had channeled draining away and leaving exhaustion in its wake. But before she could fall, Corvus was there, his arms wrapping around her, his warmth enveloping her completely. "I have you," he murmured against her hair. "I have you, my love. It's over." "Is it?" She looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of the pain that had plagued him for so long. The curse. Gone. He took her hand and pressed it against his side, and she felt only smooth, healing flesh where the wound had been. "Your power burned it away. Whatever you channeled tonight, whatever ancient magic our child awakened in you, it healed me completely." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but for the first time in longer than she could remember, they were tears of pure joy. She buried her face against his chest and let herself shake with the force of her relief, her gratitude, her overwhelming love. They stood together on the bridge while around them, the Duskwalker wolves began the grim work of tending to the wounded and the dead. Mira approached at some point, her face streaked with blood and grime, and bowed deeply to them both. "It's done, my king. My queen. The pass is secured, and the surviving enemies have surrendered. Your orders?" "Tend to our wounded first," Corvus said. "The prisoners can wait until morning. Tonight, we care for our own." Mira nodded and withdrew, and Corvus turned his attention back to his mate. "You need rest, and our healers should look at you. Make sure the baby wasn't affected by whatever power you used tonight." "The baby is fine." Neve knew it with the same certainty that had guided her actions throughout the battle. "I can feel it, sleeping peacefully now, as if it knows the danger has passed." He smiled, a real smile, unburdened by pain or fear for the first time since she had known him. "Then come, let me take you home." They returned to the keep, and Neve allowed herself to be settled into their chambers, allowed Mira to bring her warm broth and blankets, allowed the healers to confirm what she already knew, that she and the child were both healthy and whole. But through all of it, she kept her eyes fixed on Corvus, watching him move without pain, watching the color return to his scarred face, watching him exist as he was always meant to, strong and whole and free. When the healers finally left them alone, when the door closed and silence settled around them like a blessing, Corvus crossed to where she sat on the edge of the bed and knelt before her. His golden eyes held hers, and she saw everything in them. Love and gratitude and desire and devotion all woven together into something so beautiful it made her chest ache. "You saved me," he said quietly, "in every way that matters. You saved my body, my heart, my soul. You gave me a reason to keep fighting when I had none. You showed me that the mate bond wasn't a cage, but a gift. You saved me first." She cupped his face in her hands, traced the scars that she had come to love as much as any part of him. "You found me in the snow when I was dying. You gave me shelter without demanding anything in return. You showed me that I was worth protecting, worth cherishing, worth loving. She hesitated, then added quietly, Seraphina said you burned villages in the border wars. His jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. I did what war demanded. I'm not proud of all of it. But I'm not the same man I was then, and you're the reason why. She studied his eyes for a long moment, searching for deception and finding none. I believe you. You always were. He turned his head to press a kiss against her palm. You just needed someone to remind you. The air between them changed, charged with something electric and inevitable. Neve felt her wolf stirring, felt the mate bond pulsing with a need that had been building since the first moment they touched. They had waited. Waited for victory. Waited for joy. Waited for the right moment. And now that moment had finally arrived. I want you, she whispered. I want you to claim me completely. I want everyone to know that I'm yours and you're mine. I want... He silenced her with a kiss, not gentle this time, but fierce with possession and promise. His hands tangled in her hair, tilting her head back to give him better access to her mouth. She moaned against him, her body arching toward his, craving the contact she had been denied for so long. Are you certain? He asked when he finally pulled back, and she could hear the strain in his voice, feel the tension in every line of his body. Once the marking is done, it cannot be undone. We will be bound for eternity. I've been bound to you since the moment you carried me out of the snow, she interrupted. All we're doing now is making it official. He made that sound again, the growl and groan and prayer all tangled together. And then he was lifting her, laying her back against the furs, his body covering hers with delicious weight. His mouth traced a path down her throat, lingering at the spot where her neck met her shoulder, and she felt his teeth graze the sensitive skin there. Mine. He breathed against her flesh. Tell me you're mine. Yours, she gasped. Corvus, please. But he didn't bite. Not yet. First, he pulled back and bared his own throat to her, tilting his head to expose the vulnerable junction of his scarred neck and shoulder. An alpha king, offering submission to his mate. The gesture was so profound, so utterly unexpected, that fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. You first, he said quietly. I want to wear your mark before I give you mine. I want everyone who sees me to know that I belong to you just as completely as you belong to me. She rose up on trembling limbs, pressed her lips against his offered throat, felt the rapid pulse of his heartbeat against her mouth. Her wolf surged forward, demanding, desperate, and she let her teeth sharpen, let the ancient instincts take over. When she bit down, the taste of his blood on her tongue was like coming home. He shuddered beneath her, a groan tearing from his chest as the bond between them flared white-hot. She felt everything. His love, his devotion, his fierce protective instincts, his desperate hope for the future. She felt 3 years of loneliness and self-imposed isolation melting away, replaced by the warmth of connection, of belonging, of absolute certainty that they would never be alone again. Yours, he gasped as she released her bite, her tongue soothing the wound she had made. Always yours, Neve, forever yours. Then it was her turn. He lowered her back to the furs with exquisite gentleness, his eyes burning gold as he positioned himself above her. His lips found her throat again, and this time there was no hesitation, only purpose, only need, only the inevitable completion of what had begun the moment he lifted her from the snow. His teeth sank into her flesh at the junction of her neck and shoulder. The pain was sharp and immediate, and then it wasn't pain at all. It was pleasure, deep and overwhelming, rolling through her in waves that made her cry out and arch against him. She felt the bond explode between them, felt it settle into her bones like liquid fire, felt his presence take up permanent residence in the deepest chambers of her heart. She saw herself through his eyes, beautiful, powerful, sacred. She felt his absolute devotion, his willingness to die for her, his determination to spend every remaining day of his life making her happy. She felt his love for the child growing inside her, already fierce and protective, though he had never even felt it move. Mine, he breathed against her marked flesh, and the word was a vow. My mate, my Luna, my queen. Mine, she echoed, her fingers tangling in his dark hair. My mate, my king, my heart. He raised his head to look at her, and the expression on his face, the wonder, the joy, the complete and utter contentment, was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. He traced his fingers over the mark he had left on her throat, and she felt his satisfaction pulse through their bond. I can feel you, he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. Inside me, part of me, woven into everything I am. I can feel the baby too, just a flutter. But it's there. Our child. Neve. Our family. She pulled him down to her, wrapped her arms around him, and held him as close as she could. The mating marks on their throats throbbed in tandem, already healing into the silver scars that would proclaim their bond to the world. Through their connection, she felt his heartbeat synchronize with hers, felt their breathing align, felt two separate souls merge into something greater than either could have been alone. I love you, she whispered, and the words felt inadequate for the enormity of what she felt, but they were all she had. I love you, he whispered back, my Neve, my brave, beautiful, magnificent mate. I love you, and I will spend every day of eternity proving it. They lay tangled together as the moon traced its path across the sky, trading soft kisses and softer words, learning each other through the intimacy of the completed bond. When Neve finally drifted toward sleep, she felt safe in a way she had never experienced before, protected, cherished, exactly where she was meant to be. The coronation took place 1 month later when the spring thaw had begun to soften the mountain passes, and representatives from the allied packs could travel safely to the Duskwalker stronghold. Neve stood in the great hall, her mating mark proudly displayed, her swelling belly draped in silver silk, and received the crown of the Luna Queen from Corvus's own hands. With this crown, he said, his voice ringing through the hall, I name Neve Duskwalker as my mate, my queen, and the mother of my heir. Let all the packs know that her word carries my authority, her commands carry my power, and any who raise hand or voice against her raise it against me. The assembled wolves howled their approval, a sound that shook the rafters and echoed off the mountain peaks. Neve felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling so widely that her cheeks ached. In the front row, Mira stood with the rest of the Duskwalker Council, her eyes bright with pride. She had been named captain of the Luna's Guard, a new position that Neve had created specifically for the woman who had shown her kindness from the first moment of her arrival. The council members who had once questioned her presence now served her without hesitation, won over by her courage in the battle and her obvious love for their king. The pureblood cult had crumbled entirely in the wake of Lucian's death. Seraphina had been found among the fallen on the bridge, killed by wolves from her own faction who had turned on her when Neve's power shattered their fanaticism, a fitting end for the woman who had orchestrated so much death from the shadows. Those who had followed him out of fear or manipulation had been given the choice to swear loyalty to the Duskwalker pack or leave the territory forever. Most had chosen to stay, grateful for the mercy that Neve had advocated for even against her own bitter memories. As for the Frostborn pack, they had sent an envoy to beg forgiveness and offer tribute, terrified that the Alpha King would seek vengeance for their former leader's crimes. Corvus had been inclined to make them suffer, but Neve had counseled mercy there too. The pack had been Lucian's victims as much as anyone, manipulated by his charisma and cowed by his cruelty. Under new leadership, they might become valuable allies. After the coronation ceremony concluded, after the feasting and the celebration had wound down, Corvus led Neve out onto the balcony that overlooked the moonlit mountains. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, his hands coming to rest on the curve of her belly, and together they watched the stars wheel overhead. "I used to stand here and wonder what purpose was left for me," he said quietly. "The prophecy said I would meet my fated mate, but I was so sure it was a curse rather than a blessing. I thought the mate bond would be a cage, a weakness my enemies could exploit. And now?" He pressed a kiss to the mark on her throat, and she felt his love pulse through their connection, warm and steady and utterly without reservation. "Now I understand that purpose isn't something you find alone," he said. "It's something you build together. You gave me that, Neve. You and this child you're carrying. You gave me a future worth fighting for." She turned in his arms, reaching up to touch the scars on his face that she had traced so many times. The mark she had left on his throat gleamed silver in the moonlight, a permanent reminder that he belonged to her just as surely as she belonged to him. "Lucian said the pregnancy stole his youth," she murmured. "He called our child a curse, a burden, the end of everything he had planned." "And what did I say?" She smiled, remembering. "You said it gave you purpose." "I was right." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose, and finally her lips, soft and sweet and full of promise. "Every moment with you gives me purpose. Every kick of our child against your belly gives me purpose. Every day I wake up beside you gives me purpose." The baby chose that moment to move, a strong kick that they both felt through the layers of silk and skin. Corvus laughed, a sound of pure, uncomplicated joy that Neve knew she would never tire of hearing. "Active tonight," he said, spreading his fingers over her belly to feel for another movement. "The baby knows we're happy." Neve covered his hands with her own. "It can feel the love through the bond. That's what the old stories say, that the children of mated pairs are born already knowing they're loved." "Our child will never doubt it," Corvus vowed. "Not for a single moment of its life. I will make sure of that." Neve leaned back against his chest, surrounded by his warmth, protected by his strength, and looked out at the kingdom that was now hers to help him rule. Somewhere in the darkness, wolves howled in celebration. Somewhere in the forests, spring was beginning its slow conquest of winter. And somewhere in the future, their child would be born into a world where mixed blood was celebrated rather than feared, where love mattered more than lineage, where a rejected pregnant she-wolf could become a Luna Queen. "I love you," she said, the words still new enough to feel like a miracle. "I love you, Corvus Duskwalker, Alpha King and mate of my heart." "I love you, Neve Duskwalker," he replied, and his voice was rough with emotion. "Luna Queen, mother of my child and purpose of my existence." They stood together on the balcony until the stars began to fade, and the first hints of dawn painted the eastern sky pink and gold. And when they finally turned to go back inside, to the chambers where their love had been consummated and their bond had been sealed, they did so hand in hand, two halves of a whole, walking together into a future that stretched before them, bright and beautiful and full of promise. This was their happily ever after. This was the ending that had been written in the stars from the moment they were born. This was the love that would echo through generations, a legacy of hope in a world that had tried so hard to break them both. And it was only the beginning.